Hi, this is Sue Jackson of the Book by Book blog, and I'm here with my March reading wrap-up. The first book that I read this last month was The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne. This was also my favorite book of the month and one of my favorites of all time. I really loved this novel. It's the story of an Irish man named Cyril. It begins before he's even born in 1945 with his mother, who's an unwed teenager, who is humiliated in front of the whole town by the parish priest, and then kicked out of both the church and her family and her town. So she gets on a bus to Dublin and finds a job and waits for the baby to be born. Once Cyril is born, he's quickly adopted by a wealthy couple. And they're not unkind, but they're not very warm. So they provide for him materially, but not very much emotionally. Cyril, when he's a teenager, discovers that he's gay. So much of the novel deals with him trying to come to terms with this in that time and place. Being gay was not an easy thing to be in the 1950s and 60s in Ireland. So the novel drops in on Cyril every 7 years to see where he is in his life, what his relationships are like, how he's doing. It's a warm, wonderful story. This book just has everything. It's heartbreaking at times, it's heartwarming, it's very moving and poignant, but my favorite part of all, it's also very, very funny. I just loved the author's sense of humor and the way, Cyril goes through a lot, and some of it is difficult and challenging, but the author's always got that sense of humor to lighten things up. So this novel made me cry twice, but it also made me laugh out loud a whole lot. And I love any book that makes me feel that way. So that's The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne. Highly recommended. That was a book group book. And my other book group in March chose My Name is Memory by Anne Brashares. You may recognize her name. She's the author of all of the Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants YA novels. This was, I believe, her second adult novel. It's kind of hard to describe, but the main character is a man named Daniel who has lived many, many lives over the past 1,500 years. Now, Daniel says, as the narrator, that not everybody, many people live multiple lives, but he's one of the rare ones who remembers all of his lives and everything that's happened to him. So as the novel opens, it's 2006, and Daniel's a 17-year-old boy at a high school in Virginia. Now, the reason he is in that particular place is because the love of his life is also there. Now, in this lifetime, she's a 16-year-old girl named Lucy. They both go to the same high school together. She actually has a little bit of a crush on him. But while Daniel remembers all the different times their lives have crossed and that they have been in love before, Lucy doesn't remember any of that. In fact, Daniel thinks of her as Sophia because that's who she was the very first time he fell in love with her. So the novel kind of moves back and forth between the present, with Daniel and Lucy not quite connecting, and many of Daniel's past lives, so that the reader gradually gets some idea of the history that he's been through, the history he's seen, and his history with Lucy, Sophia, whatever you want to call her. There's also, there's some suspense in the novel because there's this evil being that wants revenge on Daniel for something from a past life. So Daniel fears for Lucy's safety especially. So the novel is all about Daniel and Lucy kind of trying to come together with all this history behind them, hundreds of thousands of years. And the one thing, my book group loved the novel for the most part. Most people really loved it. There was one holdout. But one thing we were all disappointed in is the novel doesn't end with a lot of resolution. So we were really excited to hear that the author is currently working on the sequel. So we can't wait to read that. I also read a book of short stories this last month, Whiskey for Breakfast by Christopher P. Mooney. Chris is actually a friend of mine. This is his first book, and I've been looking forward to this because he's an excellent writer. I've read some of his stories before when they've been published online, so I knew he was a really great writer. This is a collection of 35 short stories. Most of them are pretty dark. He deals with topics like crime, murder, suicide, prostitution. He deals with some dark topics. It's kind of like the stories are very real, very gritty. They focus on characters that we don't normally hear much about in fiction. Criminals, prostitutes. There's a lot of crime fiction out there, but it's usually about the good guys. The focus is usually on the good guys. So Chris's stories are all very engrossing. They're beautifully written. Some are as short as a single page. Others are the length of a typical short story. There are crime stories in here, which you might read in other collections, but there are a lot of really unique stories here too. I really enjoyed it. That's Whiskey for Breakfast by Christopher P. Mooney. Very engrossing short story collection. Next up, I read a modern classic, Rabbit Run by John Updike. My husband gave this to me for Christmas because I've never read Updike before, and I've really been wanting to. I did have some mixed feelings about this one. So the main character, Rabbit, is a 26-year-old man named Harry Angstrom, whose nickname in high school was Rabbit. And in high school, Harry was a star basketball player. So he's got that kind of background to live up to. Now he works as a salesman, he's married, he's got a toddler son and another baby on the way. And one day he decides he is sick of his life and he just leaves. He leaves his wife, his pregnant wife, and their child, just takes off. And, you know, the rest of the novel is about this struggle within Harry as to whether he should do what he wants or do what is right. So what kind of bothered me is it's not that much of a struggle for him. He's really, you know, in this novel, Rabbit is very self-centered. He's very selfish, very immature. And, you know, so he's not a very likable character. In addition, the novel is somewhat misogynistic, and I couldn't really tell if that was intentional as the main character's perspective, because he does narrate this, or whether some of that was coming from the author. It was written back in 1960, so that explains some of it. So there were those things that bothered me. However, I did enjoy reading the book. You know, the story kept my attention. It was engaging and mostly well written. There are some habits the author has that I didn't love, but you know, for the most part, it's a well-written and engaging novel. I'm trying to decide whether I want to read the rest of the Rabbit series. There are 3 additional books about this character. So I'd love to hear from any of you who have read them. I kind of want to know ahead of time whether Rabbit ever redeems himself and grows, or, you know, if he just stays the same character he is here. So let me know if you've already read them. In between the cracks of my longer books, I read a couple of middle grade graphic novels that I really enjoyed. Twins is written by Varian Johnson and illustrated by Shannon Wright. I'd heard a lot about this one, so I was glad to finally read it, and I really enjoyed it. So this is about a set of twins, Maureen and Francine, who are starting middle school, which in this case is 6th grade. The two of them have been inseparable their whole lives, and now Francine, who now wants to be called Fran, wants to establish a separate identity for herself. Maureen very naturally feels left behind and abandoned by her sister. Their friends feel caught in the middle. And things get really interesting when they both decide they want to run for student council president. So, this is a really fun graphic novel, but also, dealing with issues like friendship and identity, and some other things as well within their family. It's illustrated with beautiful full color illustrations, so I really enjoyed reading this, and I'd recommend it. I also read All Together Now, which is also a middle grade graphic novel, but for slightly older middle graders, really. It's by Hope Larson. Now, I found out a little too late that this is actually a sequel. The first book was called All Summer Long. You can see a little picture of it there. And it's about these two girls, Bina and Darcy, who are best friends. So in the first book, the two of them start a band together. Darcy's on keyboards, Bina plays the guitar and writes original songs for them. So now in this second book, they're starting 8th grade, and they've decided their band needs a drummer. So they find one in a boy named Enzo. He's kind of a quiet, nerdy kind of guy that's in some of their classes. And they try him out, and he's a great drummer. So it looks like things are going to work out really well. Then things get complicated. Darcy and Enzo start seeing each other, which leaves Bina out in the cold. And the two of them decide that they both want a harder, more punk sound for the band, which Bina doesn't really agree with. They want to change some of her songs to be more punk style. So, while this novel begins with creative differences, it's really about relationships, about the friendship between Bina and Darcy, and this wedge that is driven between them. It's also about first romance, not just Darcy's relationship with Enzo, but for Bina, her next door neighbor and best friend, Austin, who she's been friends with for years, suddenly wants a romantic relationship with her. She's not sure how she feels about that. So that's a part of the novel too. So it's about growing up. It's about dealing with changes, which is a huge issue for any middle grader. In this case, I had I think this was an advanced reader's copy. So I don't know whether the final copy was full color or not. But the drawings were wonderful. The story was great, and I really enjoyed it. I would like to go back and read the first one. I also read or listened to 2 audiobooks in March. The first was, there it is, Heartspring Mountain by Robin MacArthur. I really enjoyed this. It's a novel about family. It begins with a woman named Vale who's living in New Orleans, and it's 2011 when she gets a phone call from her home state of Vermont that Tropical Storm Irene has devastated the state and caused a lot of damage. And the phone call she gets is to let her know that her mother, Bonnie, has gone missing during the storm. Now, Vale and Bonnie have been estranged for years, but when Vale gets this news that Bonnie's missing, she gets on a bus, she travels back to Vermont. So it's all about Vale being re-immersed in her childhood home, the place where she grew up, the people that she grew up with. Chapters alternate between different narrators. Most of them are women. Most of them are in Vale's family. her mother, her grandmother, her great-grandmother, her great-aunt. There are a few male narrators from the family as well, but for the most part, you hear from 5 different generations of Vale's family. There's also a very strong connection to nature in this novel, because all of these women grew up in the Vermont woods, in rustic cabins, and which is the setting that Vale is now back immersed in herself. So it's a beautiful novel, Heartspring Mountain by Robin MacArthur, all about family as told through 5 generations of women and with a very strong sense of place and a focus on nature. I enjoyed it. And finally, my second and last audiobook for March was The Remarkable Journey of Coyote Sunrise by Dan Gemeinhart. Now, I always loved Dan's novels, but this is my new favorite. So Coyote is a 12-year-old girl. She lives in this school bus with her father, whose name is Rodeo. As you can tell by the names, her dad's a bit of a hippie. And the two of them have been traveling all over the country together, both living and traveling in the refurbished school bus for the last 5 years. A tragedy occurred 5 years ago, and since then they've been on the road. Now, Coyote is normally okay with their lifestyle. Things get a little lonely sometimes, but, you know, she's happy. Until one week, she calls home to talk to her grandmother, like she does every week, and finds out that something is about to happen in their hometown, something that Coyote feels she has to be back for. Now, her father has refused to even talk about the past, and certainly to return to their hometown in 5 years. So Coyote has a real challenge here to somehow get her dad to drive 4 days straight cross country back to their hometown without him actually knowing what their destination is. So they set out on this journey, with Coyote pulling strings from behind the scenes. Along the way, they pick up some stray travelers who also need to get somewhere. The characters in this novel are just wonderful. Coyote herself is just sweet and kind and very likable. And as always, Gemeinhart tackles some very serious issues here about loss and grief, while also, you know, doing that always with warmth and wonderful sense of humor. So I really enjoyed The Remarkable Journey of Coyote Sunrise by Dan Gemeinhart. And that's it. I had a great reading month in March. I read some wonderful books and a great variety. So what did you read last month? And what were your favorites? Let me know in the comments below.